Anyone who fails to recognize this behavior as rude is mistaken and suffers from a misconception of what constitutes polite and rude behavior. Experiencing and negatively evaluating the action as rude is, in other words, based on the features intrinsic to the behavior itself and the ordinary expectation we have about the behaviors appropriate to different kinds of human transactions. The general sense of appropriate behavior is established and modified over time in the light of our untutored affective responses and the education of the attitudes and emotions that occurs within the communities to which we belong. Since the evaluative experience incorporates both presentational and affective moments, it can go wrong in two different ways. First, the underlying presentation can be false or unjustified. For example, I might discover that the person at whom I am angry for misleading me did not, in fact, mislead me. I might then, in a moment of reflection, in which I modify the underlying judgment, feel remorse or shame for my original anger. However, there are also instances when the underlying cognition is true and justified, and the emotion is nevertheless unjustified and inappropriate. This inappropriate affective response will sometimes be corrected in a way that is similar to the correction of cognitive mistakes. The affective response might change over time, for example, as I learn better what constitutes rude behavior, or when someone disagrees with my assessment of shouting behavior. This introduces discordance into the stream of evaluative experience and motivates a critical reflection that appeals both to the particulars of the circumstances and to our intersubjective understanding of evaluative concepts and their relation to non-axiological properties. In other cases, however, this kind of critical reflection might be both insufficient and, in a manner of speaking, beside the point. Someone might, for example, have an inordinate fear of heights and refuse to go out on an observation deck she knows to be safe. She truly and justifiably grasps the non-axiological features of the situation and knows that it is most unlikely that she will fall, but she nevertheless fears to go out on the deck. This fear might, Peter Goldie has a nice expression for these. He calls them cognitively impenetrable emotions. This fear might, in one respect, be perfectly intelligible. She might have previously fallen from a height and suffered severe injuries. Nevertheless, she herself might, in this case, recognize that her fear is unjustified and inappropriate. She perfectly well understands the concept of danger, and she accurately sizes up the situation as safe, but she continues to experience fear. It is therefore neither the cognitive dimension nor reflection on one's feelings, because they're correct, that accounts for the inappropriateness of her episodic emotion. It is the pre-reflective affective dimension itself. She intuitively grasps this inappropriateness in a moment of pre-reflective self-awareness that has its own affective and evaluative moment. In fearing to go out on the observation deck, she is pre-reflectively aware of herself as experiencing fear. In having and recognizing this emotional reaction, she is, say, embarrassed by it. Her embarrassment is a negative appraisal of that fear, and it highlights the fact that one aspect of her knowledge of the situation, that is, that the observation deck is safe, fails to justify her fear, even as another aspect of her knowledge, that is, that the observation deck is high, motivates it. But in this case, her intuitive, affective self-awareness discloses the underlying emotional episode as inappropriate. So now I'm going to turn your attention to that very frightening-looking handout that I gave you. If, therefore, and this is one on your handout, E is an intentional feeling or episodic emotion whose base P is either a perceptual or memorial or imaginative, or a judgmental presentation of an object or situation O and its non-axiological properties X, Y, and Z, and if we understand justification as prima facie non-inferential and defeasible, then E is appropriate to O and its non-axiological properties, if and only if P is a veridical or true presentation of O and its properties, and P is justified, and P is a reason for E, and F, a pre-reflectively or reflectively self-assessing feeling or emotion, such as approbation or pride, positively appraises and thereby justifies E, and no relation of justification mentioned is defeated. Conditions 3A and 3B jointly address the truth of the underlying cognitive content, ensuring that P is both true and justified. To say that P or any cognitive content is justified means that it is directly presented to consciousness in a perception, a seeing of O as X, or a categorical modification of perception, a seeing that O is X. Conditions 3C and 3D jointly address the correctness of the affective response. Condition 3C involves our understanding of evaluative concepts and their basis in non-axiological properties, and condition 3D brings into play the self-assessing emotions that justify the affective dimension of the object-directed feeling or emotional episode. To have a self-responsible evaluative experience, a self-responsible and appropriate emotion is to have this structure of justification, I'm claiming, tentatively. As valuation is founded on presentation, so volition is founded on valuation. It is in volition, the practical sphere of reason, that decision properly enters the scene, where the term decision more precisely denotes the choice of an action as conducive to some valued good or apparent good and as arising from deliberation. Stipulating then, and this is item 4, V is a volition that issues in action A, so it's a fulfilled volition in the sense, it's a fully realized volition in the sense that it involves action. V is a volition that issues in action A as conducive to NG, and whose base is E's evaluation of G as a good end. Then we can provisionally characterize self-responsibility in the practical sphere as follows, and this is only provisional, which is different, by the way, from tentative. For the whole paper is tentative, but this is provisional within the paper. V is rationally justified and A is right if and only if A, E is appropriate, B, E rationally motivates a desire for G. The reason I put that in there is that not every emotion has a moment of desire built into it, I don't think. We can value things without desire. I can value the study of physics and have no desire to undertake it, for example. Right? C, the desire for G rationally motivates V. A conduces to G as an internal or external consequence. And F, no relation of justification entailed is defeated. And I say entailed instead of mentioned because E is appropriate, already has other justifications wrapped up in it. I have called this account of the structure of justified volition provisional, but we must turn to the discussion of eudaimonia to see the reasons for this. So I turn to the second part of my paper, entitled, very surprisingly, Eudaimonia. The preceding descriptions reveal both an ambiguity and a bifurcation in the notion of the good. On the one hand, these descriptions point to those goods that are the objects of our self-responsible evaluations and volitions. On the other hand, these same descriptions point to the teleological dimension inherent in all intentional experience, the striving toward fulfillment, and thereby reveal the normative dimension of self-responsibility. Our being as rational agents is inherently ordered toward the good of self-responsibility in all the spheres of reason. The good of truthfully disclosing what is the case, what is genuinely valuable, and what is right to do. Reason realizes its proper end, that is to say its proper good, just insofar as it achieves evidenced judgments. Husserl's own discussions of eudaimonia characterize the good in the first of these two ways, that is, as the object of our valuations and volitions. Indeed, his formulation of the first formal law of morality, his categorical imperative as he calls it, whose formulation he borrows from Brentano, is choose the best among attainable ends, or choose the best among what is attainable. Husserl states this law more objectively as, and I quote, "The best among what is attainable in the total practical sphere is not only comparatively the best, but the sole practical good," unquote. His concern, contra Kant, is not with the mere form of a legislating reason. From the beginning, there is a material dimension, the best attainable, proper to Husserl's categorical imperative. Other laws that he cites make clear that Husserl conceives the best among what is attainable as the maximization of the goods available in a situation. For example, in the axiological sphere, Husserl presents us with laws governing the comparison and summation of value. His law, his law of absorption claims that in ordering our actions to the best of the goods attainable, the highest and most comprehensive good, this best absorbs all other goods under it. Husserl's discussions of such laws indicate that he uses the teleological notions of happiness and blessedness in their consequentialist rather than arhetaic meaning, and support a view of him as an idealized consequentialist. So in that too, I think he follows Brentano. The phenomenological characterizations of self-responsibility outlined above, however, point, I think, to an arhetaic notion of the good. They point to a model of moral decision-making wherein the self-responsible agent weighs competing goods or apparent goods and the actions conducing to them in a deliberative activity that is either occurrent or that has been accomplished over time in such a way as to dispose the agent toward a certain kind of action. As various judgments and valuations are made and confirmed, they become convictions of the subject that inform subsequent judgments, valuations, and volitions. These habitualities, as Husserl calls them, make up our dispositions to expect certain features in certain kinds of situations, to pick out what is morally salient in those situations, to have certain kinds of attitudes towards them, and to act in determinate ways. This is just the kind of dispositional state that Aristotle has in mind when he speaks of virtues as states or habits or dispositions to have the right attitudes and to act rightly and from the right reasons. The virtuous agent is the one who correctly grasps and assesses situations, who has properly appraised ends and has appropriately ordered her preferences among them, who has deliberated well about which actions conduce to what ends, and who acts rightly in the circumstances. For such an agent, it is important to note, following the example of the phronimos is insufficient. The virtuous agent lives self-responsibly, judging, valuing, and deciding for herself in the light of evidence rather than passively accepting received attitudes and opinions. The self-responsible agent, acting virtuously in the pursuit of true goods for herself and for others, also realizes the goods of thinking well, feeling well, and acting well, what we might call the goods of rational agency. The goods for an agent and for others are the objects of our valuations and volitions, and are realized in actions and worldly states of affairs. Whereas the goods of agency are realized in the synthetic performances and achievements of subjects whose cognitive, affective, and volitional experiences both disclose and fashion the world as morally ordered. They are internal to the activity rather than external goods. The authenticity of this kind of life is responsible self-realization, taking responsibility for one's convictions and disclosing the evidence that warrants those convictions. It is in this moment of self-responsibility, I believe, that we properly find the eudaimonistic character of a phenomenological axiology. It is the self-responsible life that is the flourishing life for rational agents.